an ethnic studies world history teacher in the Seattle Public School District is making headlines for multiple reasons this week, and it is a pattern of behavior that goes all the way back to 2020. Let's get to it in our segment, Unbelievable. Boop. All right, I first learned about Ian Golosh back in 2020. So Ian Golosh is an ethnic studies world history teacher, which is kind of interesting because he's white. They let a white teacher teach ethnic studies? Wow. Is that like extra woke? Like it goes beyond woke to like very woke? At Chief Sealth International High School in Seattle. He is also the chair of the school's social studies department. He is also the school's union rep for the Seattle Education Association. And this will be relevant later on, but you'll remember that the Seattle Education Association recently passed a pro-Hamas resolution. So yeah, he's the representative for his school to the Seattle Education Association. So I mentioned that I first learned the name Ian Golosh back in 2020 because at the time, our friend Jonathan Cho was a reporter for Como News. I feel like he'll be okay with me saying this. I don't think it violates any sort of things. But so at the time this happened, before I play the video, Jonathan was at Como and I was at Fox 13. And I had a lot of leeway at Fox 13 for the most part to kind of pursue stories that maybe others in the TV news environment weren't pursuing. And Jonathan Cho had been covering a protest of students at the King County Jail, where some students, when they should have been at school, actually were going into the King County Jail to protest. And they were being led by a teacher. Now, Jonathan Cho ended up taking cell phone video that he gave to me to do a story about it because for some reason, Como News wouldn't let him do a story focusing on the actions of that teacher. So I did it at the time. We'll play just a short video clip of what we ended up airing at the time on Fox 13, but it was shot by our friend Jonathan Cho back in September of 2020.
While claiming...
Hey, do you want Cairo?
Keep an eye on the man in the pink hair.
No, we don't want you guys.
No, Cairo.
We don't want you.
I'm not Cairo, bro.
We don't have permission to use none of that.
So you have a news crew that's coming up to a government building, a taxpayer-owned building, to document a protest that students are holding in that building, the King County Jail. The man, if you're watching, in the pink hair, who sees the news crews approaching, pokes his head in to ask the students, hey, do you want the news here? They say no. So what does he do? What does that teacher do? A teacher who's there with his students. He turns around and he puts his hand in the to block the camera, and immediately his action in doing that leads to further harassment of the news crew that feels like it has to leave. So here you have this adult figure who is with these students who've barged into the King County Jail. So clearly the adult is not giving them a good example of how they should behave. And then the adult is asking the kids, hey, do you want the free press here? You're in a government building. Do you want us to tell the free press to leave? And when they say yes, because they're kids, we don't want them here, he puts his hand in the face of the camera. And after that, students start yelling at the news crew. We cut the video short, but dropping F-bombs at the news crew. You got one young kid, clearly doesn't know how the media works, says, you don't have permission to use my likeness. Okay, you don't need permission. So at the time, I recall reaching out to and finding out who this teacher was, Ian Golosh. And I reached out to him, and he said, I have no interest in talking to you. I reached out to the school district at the time, and we did a larger story about this activism streak that teachers were on, and I thought it was made even worse by the fact that he was there encouraging this behavior by the students he is supposed to be an example for. So anyway, we do this story in 2020. Three plus years go by. Who is resurfacing this week in the Seattle media? So Ian Golosh has now this week been the subject of two blockbuster reports. One from our friend Jason Rantz. Jason Rantz, story at mynorthwest.com. Seattle student failed quiz for saying men can't get pregnant. Jason writes, an activist teacher failed a Seattle student on a quiz for saying only women can get pregnant and that only men have pee-pees. A 10th grade ethnic studies world history teacher at Chief Sealth International High School in Seattle gave students a quiz titled Understanding Gender versus Sex. The quiz provided a series of statements to be labeled true or false, or questions with multiple choice. Question 4 was a true or false question with the statement, all men have penises. The student labeled the statement true, since it is in fact true. But the teacher penalized the answer, marking it incorrect. Similarly, question 7 was a true or false question with the statement, only women can get pregnant. Again, the student marked the statement true because only women can get pregnant. Again, the teacher penalized the student, insisting the answer is false. So failing this student on that quiz for being biologically accurate in his answers to the questions that were posed. The teacher's name, Ian Golosh. I would also note that that particular quiz has no relevance to the class he is supposed to be teaching, which is Ethnic Studies World History. Although in the story that Jason Rantz did, Seattle Public Schools defended Ian Golosh and defended his decision to give this particular quiz to students, which is wild. So now that story in and of itself and Ian Golosh's history of actually participating in protests with his students and harassing news crews, that would be enough, right? I think either of those on their own make him unfit to be a role model or to be teaching kids. But it gets worse. Much worse. So our friend Ari Hoffman sees Jason Rantz's story, and he decides to look deeper into this teacher, Ian Golosh. And he finds out a couple things. That one, outside this teacher's classroom and inside the classroom, he has what can only be characterized as pro-Hamas propaganda posters. One of them actually depicting a Hamas terrorist. And then Ari looked at his Facebook page. On November 27th, here's what Ian Golosh posted. This is what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong with evidence, please. On October 7th, Hamas didn't behead anyone. Hamas didn't rape anyone. The bodies found charred beyond recognition were made that way either by Israeli tanks, missiles, or helicopter gunships. Hamas soldiers were not carrying weapons that could do that kind of damage to human bodies. A body looks very different once it's been vaporized by a Hellfire missile or an explosive tank round as opposed to being set on fire with, say, gasoline. Israel, operating under the Hannibal Directive, chose to obliterate Israeli civilians, including at least one child, in their efforts to kill Hamas militants. I'm just trying to get it straight from myself. I don't know how into the weeds y'all are on this. Also, F Hamas, F Israel, I'm a communist. So here you have this teacher who, again, he's the school's representative to the Seattle Education Association, a teachers union that passed what really was a anti-Israel, pro-Hamas resolution. So perhaps not a surprise that he's on his personal Facebook page denying outright Hamas atrocities, blaming some of the worst atrocities against Israelis on Israel. I think what's more shocking is the posters that he has up saying free Gaza, solidarity with Palestine, Palestine will be free. A little more shocking that in a school environment, those posters would be allowed. But it gets even worse. So if you look at Ian Golosh's Facebook page, his profile picture right now is graffiti that has the anarchist symbol and says, abolition is my love language. Great. So now you've got a teacher openly advocating for the abolition of police and openly affiliating himself with anarchists. Could it get worse? I guess it could get worse. You guys might recall during the summer of 2020, protesters tried to shut down Interstate 5 in Seattle. And the reason this particular protest, out of all the protests and riots that happened this summer, was covered so much in the media is because there was a wrong-way driver who tried to get around this closure of the interstate that was done by protesters. He ended up striking 2 protesters and killing them. And so, did he kill one or two? Did they both die? I mean, it's a sad thing, right?
Right, yeah.
They put themselves in a very dangerous situation by shutting down a freeway. But at the end of the day, they were struck by a car that was driving the wrong way. So I'm not trying to diminish the loss of life there. But after what happened, there was a lawsuit filed against the city of Seattle, the state of Washington, and King County. It was filed on behalf of, it says, complaint for damages on behalf of Black Lives Matter protesters for wrongful death, personal injuries, civil rights violations, and Public Records Act violations. And it listed a bunch of plaintiffs. And one of the plaintiffs is Ian Golosh, which suggests that he was on the interstate that night, taking part in that protest. So this is, I think it was just one of them.
One died.
One, yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is a clear pattern from this teacher that by any reasonable stretch makes him unfit to teach kids. Going back to 2020, and you really think that the very first time he'd engaged in something like that was when it was caught on camera? No. But going back to 2020, facilitating a protest where students barged into the King County jail, harassing news crews and blocking cameras, giving the okay to students to continue to harass those news crews, which that should have resulted in his termination right there. But no, schools don't care about the First Amendment. They care about the First Amendment of their kids who should be in school, but instead are protesting at the King County jail, but they don't care about the First Amendment rights of the news crews because clearly he kept his job. So you fast forward, he's giving kids in an ethnic studies world history class quizzes about whether only women can get pregnant, and failing kids who answer biologically correct, but who fail to answer in the ideological way that he wants them to answer.